that is like this fundamental misconception that goes along with this entire space, that the technology is the thing that makes it valuable versus the technology is enabling this new way for people to interact with a person, or not even interact with necessarily. It's enabling like a deeper connection to the network of this thing that you believe in. And that's like been the fundamental part, I think, for understanding NFTs is you just have to think about networks.
How's your experience been by having, you've kind of got these multiple networks. You've got an Instagram network, you've got a Twitter network, and then you've built your own sort of something you almost control. I'm using the word control quite loosely there, but something you have kind of a stake of ownership in. How can you talk about that and how that sort of plays out in Visualize Value?
Your friends are just not that interesting. That's like the key insight behind why everybody is moving towards this algorithmic content delivery. So, most people's Instagram pages are people they know in person, or people they've met, or, friends of friends, or celebrities they admire, or, someone you have a personal connection to in some way. The advent of TikTok, I think, has made a lot of these platforms aware of the fact that the content you pick for yourself is not the most interesting content on the platform. And their goal is to keep you on the platform as long as possible, right? That's what their revenue is tied to. They want to put as many ads in front of you as they can. So all of these platforms now are moving towards just delivering you content from people you don't necessarily follow, but you're going to want to consume. On Instagram, I've noticed that they're trying to keep up with TikTok, so they're pushing the Reels feature on Instagram, and they want it to be more like you just open the app and it's complete passive consumption. Like they just serve you up wherever they want to serve you and keep you there. So I've noticed the only way that I can truly keep up with that is to produce animated full screen reel content, which is not completely native to my skill set, but it's not a massive departure. Like taking some of the pieces and adding some motion, or adding like an extra degree of meaning to it by like, there's lots of different techniques you can use with motion, but that's been the only way to kind of keep the momentum up. And I think I'm seeing a lot of it on Twitter as well. That's definitely an interesting challenge, and the idea of like trying to use these platforms to find the people that you can pull into a more thoughtful and interesting network has been the strategy of mine for a long time. Like we have a Discord where I'd rather spend my time in there with 24 people active a day than on Twitter just being bombarded with algorithmic stuff. But I think the interesting thing about Web3 tokens, networks that you are attached to in a more material way, is that it's going to take like a big cultural shift to get to the adoption of that. I think like the chicken nugget is such a great example of it. It's like the junk food, your addiction to junk food versus deciding to go and, grow your own food or eat organic food or slow down. Some people argue that the reason things are playing out this way is because there's no cost to creating crap, right? Like if you had to pay to get something in front of someone, or if you had to pay to connect to something, 90% of stuff would disappear overnight. Like 90% of the garbage would just go. Someone made this argument about spam email. Like if you had to pay to send an email, imagine how much less junk would be in your inbox. And there's like valuable and valid arguments on both sides of that too. Like free technology is amazing, free information is amazing, but there's obviously ways in which things get exploited when there is no downside cost to doing them. Web3 and the decision you make to like attach yourself to one network is very different than just being like jammed content in your face based on like what the most distracting thing in the world is. So I think that's like the sliver of hope that the Web3 social network offers, is like people are going to curate this stuff based on the things that they truly value, because there's a cost to being involved. So I think what fascinated me when I first heard about NFTs is people who create digitally, like natively, like me, for visualized value. There's something unique about the idea that the thing that used to be just the magnet for attracting people's attention to get them to do something else could have value in itself. Like anything else, I think just participating in it, using it, understanding it better was basically the catalyst for making better work in that space. So starting to use the medium of NFTs to do the visualized value thing, which is basically explain NFTs. So it's like this meta commentary on the space itself, which I think then got way more attention from people that were more native to the space, because I think people are materially invested in helping explain this technology to onboard more people. So like there was this service to the community being done by trying to like dispel some of the myths and explain some of the concepts behind these like networked pieces of art, and just start to talk about my experience of making art. Yeah, the cool thing I realized through running a bunch of auctions on Foundation is obviously your 200,000 Twitter followers aren't going to participate in this, but there might be half a dozen people that are materially invested in the work you're doing and can support at a outsized contribution, right? So I think there's so many different ways to think about NFTs from that, from like a fundraising perspective. Like these are also things you learn in retrospect, whereas like one of one, where you can publish 30 pieces a year, or you can do an edition of 1,000 and then attach all this utility on the back end to editions, things of that nature. And I think that is like this fundamental misconception that goes along with this entire space, that the technology is the thing that makes it valuable, versus the technology is enabling this new way for people to interact with a person, or not even interact with necessarily. It's enabling like a deeper connection to the network of this thing that you believe in. And that's like been the fundamental part, I think, for understanding NFTs, is you just have to think about networks. Just think about people who have collected some of the visualized value stuff, reached out to me. And I think first and foremost, people like the aesthetic. They would hang it on their wall. But secondarily, a lot of these people are collectors and investors. So they're looking at networks that will grow. Like any business or any venture, you're betting your capital on the fact that this network will continue to expand, and you bought a stake in that network very early on.
Based on your experience, do you see more value in the connection of the networks of the people that you've kind of connected together than the technology that surrounds it? Do you think that's a more important
100%.
asset for your brand than the actual technology or the monetary layer on top of it?
Money, the concept, is kind of an abstraction for connection too. So the idea that people focus on the size of the network generally versus the strength of the connection between the nodes in the network. And I think that is, you can build a brand either way. You can imagine a visual where it's like you have a top down, here's the brand at the top, and it has really strong connections to every individual person, right? That's a traditional brand with a mouthpiece that doesn't interact with anybody. It's just like, we make product that you want to buy, and that's great. Versus an internet native brand where the visualized value Discord, I could not show up in there for a month and nothing changes. Everybody's talking to each other. Their friendships being built. They're making products together. They're shipping stuff. They're joking around. I would describe as a decentralized brand. where I'm throwing stuff into the network and I'm trying to shape and attract a certain type of person and like throw all these magnets out. But then they come into this world and they can form relationships with one another. And all of these things are so like nascent, even the idea of like collaborating with people permissionlessly without having a like contract in place or, you know, a salary negotiated, all of those things. They're all like new ideas. And a lot of what I think this technology does is just enables like novel ways of collaborating, novel ways of playing with economics. And people who claim to know exactly how that's going to play out, I think are misleading at best. You know, it's like there's just a lot of smart people that are intrigued by this. And that's, I think, a more honest assessment of what's going on, like people trying to play around and make these viable economic models happen. And the DAO thing is kind of fascinating, where nobody goes the communication layer first. Like the really difficult thing I think to do is to get people all together that have similar values, interests, complementary skill sets, and then give them a task, or like they come up with a task together, versus people who come product first, let's say, and then just recruit random people from around the internet, and then that quickly falls apart because they don't like working together, or they aren't attached enough to the network to stick it out if things go a little sideways. I think the pushback is often from people that maybe don't operate online to the same degree that the people who are in this space do. Like more than 50% of my life is spent on the internet, I would think.